Do you know the difference between an assassin and a bounty hunter, Dyego?
Westin smiled at me lopsidedly as he asked the question. I began to suspect he was doing so for the sole sake of my annoyance. I had asked him on the several times he had flashed that crooked lupine grin to please not do so, and yet he persisted anyway. He had a habit of doing things for the purpose of being an irritant. From the way he smiled to the manner in which he twirled those noxious nicksticks between his fingers, to the nervous habit of chewing the edges of his slightly too long moustache. The very existence of Westin felt lab-tested and tailor-made to mildly irk me. And whenever I brought these loathsome little quirks up to him, the human would just chuckle and apologize and go right on doing them. Westin Coduroi was a troublesome gadfly of a human, but for some reason, he had attached himself to me. And so whenever he found himself on Morugga, he would track me down, take me to his favorite cantina, and regale me with tales of his latest exploits, whether I wanted him to or not. I glowered at him under the rim of my goggles, running a toe around the edge of my mug, choosing my words carefully before saying them. Uttering the wrong thing would only send Westin into a spiraling tangent. The little demagogue tended to wax poetic whenever he fell into a self-aggrandizing mood. This was especially true if he'd spent any time in the bottle, and the fumes of strong liquor wafting from his fleshy, fat-lipped mouth suggested that he was on his third Bespin breeze at least. I didn't want to be stuck in this booth, alternating between listening to Westin ramble about the nuances between his self-proclaimed career of bounty hunter and assassins, and wistfully gazing through the grimy window to the red dust storms that racked Morugga. So my next words would have to be well placed. Whatever the reason, I'm sure it's trifling.
Ah, but that's where you're wrong, Dyego.
He triumphantly countered, and I knew immediately that my words were chosen poorly.
An assassin is just a butcher at the end of the day. His job is to kill, with no room for tact or subtlety, blade or blaster. There's no room for nuance in the craft of the assassin. Dead is dead. Even a Gamorrean could do it. But a bounty hunter, now that takes tact and skill.
Westin slung back his head, taking a deep draught from the electric orange beverage in his hand and slamming the tin mug down with a sharp thud.
They are just that, Dyego. A hunter. They track their target, bring it down, and sometimes have to take it with them alive. There is panache, and
he blinked for a moment, frowning as the words escaped his alcohol-fogged mind, then returned to his foolish, crooked smile.
Panache and debonair. That is the difference, my fine Doug friend, between an assassin and a bounty hunter.
I rolled my eyes and groaned at this pedantic quibble, rubbing the bridge of my nose with a toe knuckle and willing this encounter to end sooner rather than later. This was all building up to one of Westin's big announcements. I already knew it. If you're about to reveal that you have a target on Morugga, I intoned in a low voice, then I'd suggest keeping that to yourself. The planetoid Morugga, and especially its main hub of Miners Town, was a bustling nest of smugglers, pirates, bootleggers, and all other sorts of riffraff. It was second only to Kessel in the production of spice, home to several wildly dangerous semi-legal pod racing courses, and was squarely in the control of Huttese cartels. One such hut, Morugga, owned the Spicer's Moon, the very bar that Westin had insisted we drink in whenever he came to our run-down little spaceport. It also catered to every cutthroat and outlaw who lurked the Corellian run, who might take issue with a human loutishly declaring himself a bounty hunter on the prowl. Fact was, Westin Coduroi was putting both our lives at risk, with every word falling from his stupid drunken mouth.
These fine folks, He began to slur.
Before I finally had enough of his idiotic gibbering, I swung myself from the booth, reached over and grabbed a footful of the grimy rag Westin wore as an ascot, and dragged him from the moon amidst his inebriated complaints. Pointedly, I ignored the venomous glares from the other patrons, several of whom were probably ready to send us both to our respective makers at the first utterance of their name. Grunting in agitation, Westin finally acquiesced and, with a noticeable stumble in his gait, followed me to an alley behind the cantina. He straightened himself up and brushed a lock of his sandy hair to the side, grinning like a cheeky bothan as he rested a hand on his blaster. I glared up at him, thoroughly unamused with the shtick. "Panther brains, I just saved your life, and you're standing there like it's already payday."
Might as well be,
he countered with a wink.
I'm on the trail of someone big, hired by Morugga himself. That's why I'm casing out the moon, you see.
I raised a suspicious eyebrow, my gaze shifting to the somewhat busy thoroughfare a mere handful of yards away, and motioned for him to keep his voice down. Thankfully, Westin was not so drunk at that point as not to catch the hint. Maybe the cavalier human did have some capacity for surreptition. Fumbling in the liner pocket of his flight jacket, he produced a small datapad, the disposable sort used by smugglers who didn't like leaving a trail on the HoloNet. His fingers swiped the screen for a moment before he handed it over, revealing the sneering visage of a ruddy-skinned Iktochi.
Kelos Grail,
Westin proudly announced, credit sums dancing in his eyes.
Captain of the YV-560 Roan Runner. Smuggler, spice dealer, gambler, currently wanted by Morugga for dereliction of credit payment.
He pulled a case of Nick Sticks from his shirt, stuck one between his lips, and lit it in a clumsy motion. If he was trying to be dashing, he'd failed.
Can't nail an Iktochi in the air, Dyego. They're too slick at a ship's controls. You need to get them on the ground. That's the only way.
I rolled my eyes and handed him back the datapad. The kid had been watching too many HoloNet serials. Probably thought every Iktochi was an ace pilot. Hope jetuta to stupa. You realize that not every Iktochi is a famous Jedi and Republic general, right, Westin? I sardonically asked. How much is Morugga offering anyway? And why are you coming to me with this?
Because, my gallant engineer, you have your finger, toe, on the comings and goings of the shipyard,
he declared in a triumphant yet hushed reveal.
You maintain the droids for the port. You oversee their stevedore duties. You have access to which ships are docked where, and you know their arrival and departure times. If anyone can tell me where Kelos will be grounded, it's you.
I stroked the tendril at my snout thoughtfully. As far as harebrained schemes went, he could have done much worse. Tapping a dock worker to know when a pilot would be tethered to port wasn't half a bad plan, I had to admit. Maybe Westin wasn't the cavalier poodoo head I'd been convinced he was. No, he undoubtedly was an idiot, but he at least had his moments. Westin exhaled a fat plume of smoke through his teeth before resuming.
As to what the going rate is, Morugga personally offered me.
He paused, cocking his head to the side with what he must have thought was roguish pomp.
He personally offered me 300,000 credits.
The look on his face, that of immense pride and self-congratulation, would have been endearing if he wasn't such a Murashani wormo.
Of which I will be happy to cut you in for a slice, Dyego. Say, 3,000?
It sounds risky, I mused as I stroked my tendrils. 3,000 credits to risk my job, possibly my life. I'm no coward, Westin, but I survived this dump of a planet so long by not getting involved in the affairs of Hutts or their clients. It was the only way to survive around here, unless you wanted to dig yourself into an early grave mining and refining spice. Working for the Miners Town Port Authority took some technical know-how, but it was safe, stable, and close enough to be honest work that I could sleep easy at night. People who dealt directly with the Hutts, even one so relatively low in the clan hierarchy as Morugga, tended to live very short and aggressively exciting lives. You see it all too often here on Morugga. I know I have. Westin looked deflated for a second, inwardly pondering how high he could raise the stakes for my help without cutting into his bottom line. After a moment of drunken inner arithmetic, he took a deep breath and redoubled his effort.
Fine. How about 30,000? That's a huge payday, Dyego, for not much work at all. I just need you to tell me where the runner is docked and when Grail will be there. I can handle it from there. Get this done, and I'll cut you in for 10%.
He must have been desperate. It couldn't have been because Westin Coduroi of all people was feeling charitable. He didn't believe he could do this without my help, so he was willing to take a considerable chunk of his presumed payout and offer it to me in the form of a bribe. I shot a glance back to the mouth of our alley and grunted. I still don't know, Westin. I watched him slump in defeat. The human looked like a disconsolate meerkat in the shadowy, dust-infused gloom of Morugga's twilight. Endearing in how pathetic it was. Echuta. I knew I was going to regret what I was about to do. Look, show me some proof that Morugga tapped you specifically for this job, and I'll consider it. Working for a Hutt might be dangerous, but getting on their bad side was even more so. Westin lit up with a toothy grin, digging through his pockets until he produced a cheap, palm-sized holodisc. He handed it down to me, and when I tapped the button to activate it, a fuzzy, cyan-tinted apparition of the hefty Morugga appeared in the sole of my foot. The slobbering visage spoke in a scratchy approximation of his native Huttese. A brief image came into view of the mark, a rough-skinned humanoid with callous eyes and dismissive curl of his lip. The heavy, downward curved horns marked him as a native of Iktoch, which meant that his sense of self-preservation was already profoundly developed. Why Morugga was giving this bounty to someone as raw and untested as Westin was a mystery, and not one that I cared overmuch to ponder. I tapped the prompt on Westin's disk, deactivating it and sending the prodigious specter of Morugga back inside with a soft crackle before handing him back the device. That's definitely the big guy, I confirmed with an apprehensive nod. But I couldn't help but notice he never referred to you by name. In his usual impulsive flippancy, Westin dismissed this concern as a mere trifle.
I don't see any other bounty hunters running around, Dyego. And if there are any, they could stand to network and advertise their services a little better. Looking mighty full of himself, he dropped his depleted nickstick onto the ferrocrete ground and extinguished it under the heel of his boot.
With a puckish snicker, the human exhaled a final gout of smoke from his lungs, which floated downwards towards me. Eyes watering and nostrils flaring in irritation, I coughed and waved a foot before my snout, before glaring up at him angrily. He offered a sheepish grin and shrugged in reply.
Sorry. So, Dyego, you've seen the disc. You've read the warrant. Will you help me?
It would serve this troublesome womp rat Murashani right if I told him no. Let him blunder through the dark and learn that, in addition to panache and debonair, the calling of a bounty hunter required that your grey matter actually work, and not just be full of cheap exploits gleaned from trashy HoloNet dramas. Westin Coduroi could stumble around, probably scare off the Iktochi smuggler he was chasing, and finally absorb the humbling lesson that perhaps he was not meant for the life of gallant adventures in the field of sapient acquisitions. More likely, however, he would end up getting himself killed in the process. I wrestled with these two probable outcomes for Westin, causing me to hesitate a final moment longer before heaving a deep sigh and wearily pinching the bridge of my snout. Okay, Bantha Brains, I conceded. I'll help you this once, but in exchange you have to promise me something. Westin grinned like a hungry Nexu, rewarding my poor judgment call by gasping in exultation as he ran a hand through his sandy shock of hair once more.
Oh man, thanks. I appreciate this, Dyego. Name your price. Consider it done.
Folding my legs in front of me, I leveled him with a flat, no poodoo gaze. After this job, you stay away from me and the huts. Trust me on this, Westin. Getting mixed up in hut business is a fast way to shorten your life.